Did you know that over 35% of travelers report experiencing a strange, unsettling encounter during the holiday season? From eerie sounds in remote cabins to shadows lurking in hotel corridors, the holidays are filled with more than just festive cheer. Buckle up for some holiday horror stories that might make you think twice about that cozy winter getaway. Welcome to Scary Holiday Nightmares, where the holiday magic sometimes takes a dark twist. While holidays bring joy and togetherness, they can also open the door to the unexpected. Lonely, snow-covered roads, eerie, empty hotels, and the unsettling quiet of remote cabins. Sometimes, beneath the cheer, there's something hiding, waiting to give you a true holiday fright. I don't know why I agreed to it. Maybe it was my friend's insistence that I loosen up or that I needed this. After all, the holidays had always been a time for family, warmth, and laughter. But that year, I'd lost my father, and it didn't feel right being at home. I figured maybe they were right. A remote cabin in the snowy mountains, complete with a roaring fireplace and no cell service, sounded like the perfect getaway. We got there just as the sun was setting. The cabin was charming in a rustic way but felt oddly untouched, like it hadn't seen visitors in decades. I shrugged it off as we unpacked and settled in. The first night was surprisingly peaceful, with everyone laughing around the fireplace, sharing stories and cups of warm cocoa. By the time I went to bed, I felt a sense of calm, like maybe this trip was exactly what I needed. The peace didn't last long. On the second night, we decided to explore a bit and found a trail behind the cabin that seemed to lead up into the mountains. The snow was thick, muffling every step. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional snap of branches. We were halfway up the trail when I noticed something. The snow behind us, our footprints, they didn't look right. Every time I turned around, it seemed like there were more prints than we'd left, like someone else was following just a few steps behind. My friend Sarah laughed it off, suggesting that maybe the snow was shifting, but something didn't sit right with me. I brushed it off too, trying to match her confidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, the atmosphere shifted. The cabin was colder, the air heavy. Shadows flickered in the corners, even with the fireplace blazing. My unease grew when I went to bed, a chilling breeze drifting through the room, though all the windows were shut. As I lay there, trying to fall asleep, I heard a faint creak from the floorboards in the hallway, like someone pacing back and forth. I assumed it was one of my friends until I heard them all start to breathe heavily, asleep in their rooms. I froze, listening intently, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, the footsteps grew louder, closer, stopping right outside my door. Then there was a knock, a soft, deliberate knock. Who is it?" I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. No answer, just the silence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on me. I didn't dare move, my heart pounding as I lay motionless until dawn finally broke. I told my friends about the footsteps, the knock, but they laughed it off, saying I was probably just dreaming. Still, I knew what I'd heard. I suggested leaving early, but they brushed it off, insisting we were here to unwind. Reluctantly, I agreed to stay one more night. On the final night, the cabin was colder than ever. I bundled up in layers, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I lay in bed, I heard it again, the footsteps, slow and steady, creeping down the hallway. This time, they didn't stop outside my door. Instead, I heard a strange scraping sound, like nails dragging along the walls, inching closer and closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I flung open my door and bolted into the living room, calling out for my friends. They stumbled out, half awake, confusion and fear on their faces. That's when I noticed it. On the cabin floor, leading from each of our rooms to the front door, were wet footprints. They didn't match any of our shoes and looked larger, misshapen as if someone had dragged a heavy, distorted foot through the snow. In silence, we gathered our things, and without a word, we left that cursed cabin. No one said anything on the drive home, each of us lost in our own thoughts, haunted by what we'd seen. None of us has spoken about that trip since, but every year around the holidays, I feel a strange chill in the air, as if something or someone followed me home from Bleak Ridge. I've always loved the energy of New York City, especially during the holidays. The lights, the carolers, the bustling streets. It felt magical. So, last December, I decided to book a solo trip, hoping to soak in the festive vibe. I found a charming Airbnb in an older part of Manhattan, not far from Central Park. The place had an antique charm, vintage wallpaper, a creaky wooden staircase, and even an old grandfather clock in the hall that chimed on the hour. My host, an elderly woman named Mrs. Reinhardt, seemed pleasant, though a bit too quiet. She handed me the key and told me she'd be leaving for her family's place upstate, so I'd have the building to myself. The first night, I was beyond excited. After a long day exploring, I returned to the Airbnb, climbed the narrow staircase, and fell into bed. I must have been out for only an hour when a faint tapping sound pulled me from sleep. I checked my phone. 2:15 a.m. I listened, convincing myself it was probably the pipes. But as I lay there, the tapping grew louder, turning into what sounded like faint footsteps right outside my door. My heart pounded. I tried to ignore it, but the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, back and forth in the hallway. I took a shaky breath, sat up, and told myself to stop imagining things. But when I looked toward the door, my skin went cold. There was a shadow under the door, as if someone were standing right outside. "Hello," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. After a few tense moments, the shadow faded, and the footsteps receded down the hall. The next morning, I brushed it off. Old buildings make noise, I reasoned. And shadows? Just tricks of light. I spent the day taking in holiday decorations, shopping for gifts, trying to shake the unsettling memory. When I got back to the Airbnb, it was late, and I was exhausted. I climbed into bed, trying to convince myself it had been my imagination. At around 3 a.m., a loud bang woke me up. My heart raced as I looked around in the dark. There it was again, the shadow outside my door, perfectly still. I felt trapped, not daring to move or make a sound. The door handle began to turn, slow and steady. Clicked, then opened just an inch. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping whatever it was would go away. Then, in a moment of dread, I felt the mattress dip, as if someone had just sat down at the edge of the bed. I held my breath, paralyzed, feeling the weight shift closer, inch by inch. Finally, I forced myself to open my eyes, but there was nothing there, just the same cold, empty room. I couldn't shake what I'd seen. I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined Mrs. Reinhardt at the window, a leftover fear twisting reality. But as I made my way through the cold streets, every glimpse into a shadowed corner or every reflection in a glass window made my skin crawl. I made it to my hotel room, a last-minute booking since I couldn't stay another night in that place. I locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and left the lights on, feeling a strange sense of being followed, watched. The next morning, my curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know more. I searched for the address online, hoping to find something that could explain my experience. And there it was, a news article from 5 years ago. Mrs. Reinhardt had indeed owned the building, living alone after her husband passed away. But what shocked me was the report of her final days. Neighbors had heard her talking to someone late at night, long conversations full of pleas and desperate whispers. She claimed there was something in the building with her, something that had crept closer every night, until one day, she disappeared without a trace. The building remained uninhabited, but on the anniversary of her last day, some claimed they'd seen her ghostly figure watching from the second-floor window, still waiting, still afraid. A chill ran down my spine as I closed my laptop. My holiday in New York had turned into something I could never explain or escape. Even now, back home, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear soft footsteps outside my bedroom door. And each time, I can't help but wonder if Mrs. Reinhardt somehow followed me, hoping that I'll be the one to finally hear her out. I'll never forget the Christmas when everything changed. It started out like any other holiday. Family gathered around, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filling the house. But something felt off, like there was a strange energy in the air, a tension that no one could shake. It was the night of Christmas Eve, and we had just finished opening presents. The fire crackled softly in the living room, and the snow outside fell gently, painting the world in a soft white. As I helped clean up, I heard the doorbell ring. A light chime, like someone had just arrived, but no one was expected. My parents were in the kitchen, too busy to answer the door, so I reluctantly made my way to it. When I opened it, no one was there. I figured it was some prank, maybe a neighbor playing around, so I turned to go back inside. But then I noticed something strange on the porch. A large, old-fashioned wicker basket, covered in a faded red blanket. It seemed out of place. Curious, I bent down to pick it up. That's when I saw it. A small, pale hand sticking out from under the blanket. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled the blanket away, and there, nestled inside, was a child. She looked no older than 5, her face pale and lifeless, her hair a tangled mess of dark curls. Her clothes were tattered, her shoes missing. It was like she had been abandoned, left alone in the cold. Panicked, I grabbed the girl, rushing her inside to get help. But as I stepped over the threshold, I noticed something even worse. The front door slammed shut behind me. The wind outside howled, but there was no draft inside. The air was still too still. I laid the girl on the couch and ran to the kitchen to find my parents. But when I returned, she was gone. The blanket, the basket, everything had vanished. I searched the entire house, calling her name, but there was no trace. It was as if she had never been there at all. But I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't dreaming. I could still feel the cold from the basket, the weight of her tiny body in my arms. Later that night, as I lay in bed trying to forget the horrifying encounter, I heard a soft knock at my door. I didn't want to answer it, couldn't, but the knocking persisted, slow and deliberate, like someone was waiting for me to open it. Reluctantly, I got up, walked to the door, and opened it. There, standing in the hallway, was the little girl. Her eyes were empty, hollow, and her lips curled into a sickening smile. "Why did you leave me outside?" she whispered in a voice that was too quiet, too unnatural. I tried to slam the door shut, but it wouldn't budge. I turned around, and in the reflection of the hallway mirror, I saw her standing behind me, her thin fingers reaching out, her breath cold against my neck. That night, I barely slept. The door remained open, the house eerily quiet, except for the occasional whisper in the dark. The next morning, I rushed to tell my parents. But when I mentioned the little girl, they looked at me like I was crazy. They said no one had been at the door. They said there was no basket, no girl. They told me I had imagined it all. But I knew the truth. Since then, every Christmas Eve, when the snow falls softly and the house feels too quiet, I hear the faintest knock on the door. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see a little pale hand reaching out from the darkness. In the cabin on Bleak Ridge, a seemingly peaceful getaway turns terrifying as strange footsteps and unsettling signs suggest something sinister lurking. The holiday haunt in the Big Apple reveals the chilling presence of a ghostly figure, haunting an Airbnb in New York City, with a tragic backstory. Meanwhile, the Christmas visitor introduces a ghostly child, leaving a family member haunted by an eerie encounter. These stories remind us that holidays, filled with warmth and joy, can also carry a darker, more unsettling side, lurking just beneath the surface. Have you ever experienced a holiday horror of your own? Share your chilling stories in the comments below. And if you crave more spine-tingling tales, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more unsettling content. Stay tuned if you dare.